Hello, everyone. Today's webinar topic will be corridor mapping tool in UgCS. First, I will show how to create corridor mapping road manually. Then I will show the new functionalities that we are working right now on. It's import from KML files and creating of corridor mapping road. And also discuss for possible design of corridor mapping roads splitting. And that is one of the reasons and one of the purpose for this webinar. We would appreciate very much the feedback from you, from actual users who fly using UgCS. And if you can comment maybe on the split design that we are right now thinking about, and I will tell and show how we think it should work. And if you have some any suggestions, you can then send them in the next days to support@ugcs.com, and we'll be happy to know the actual needs, the use cases, and how would you like to see this split functionality. So I will start with manual creation of the corridor mapping road. So the version I will be showing now today is currently it's internal beta 3.7. We'll probably release it in beta in some next weeks. But the main functionality for corridor mapping road will remain the same. But in this version, there will be the import option for KML from KML files, which is currently not available in 3.6. So I creating the road, I choose the default settings. Later on, there will be the use case where I will need to change return to home altitude, and I will explain the usages of it. So to create corridor road, at the beginning we start as always with the first waypoint at the desired takeoff location, and then we choose corridor mapping tool, and we can draw the line by placing points of the corridor that we want to scan. So I'll go out of the boundaries of my field. And create such creeping line. So once I have created the segment, this all this is one single segment of corridor road. You can see here on the road tool, here's corridor mapping 2 of 2. First is simple waypoint, then it's corridor mapping. Then there are 11 points where I was clicking on the map, and each of them has a coordinates, which you can adjust if necessary. And also by these points, you can adjust the line, how it will fly. The next parameter is how wide should be the corridor. I have here settings of 100 meters, but I will decrease them to 10. And with 10 meters, I get a single line. And there's a flight speed. The payload camera you choose for the mission. the main principle is the same as for photogrammetry. We are creating a route to capture the images, and we specify the desired ground resolution. Based on this ground resolution, flight altitude is calculated to get the image, and based on forward overlap, it's calculated how often will be automatically triggered camera by distance. And there's a side overlap. Side overlap is calculated when you specify wider area of for the corridor. For example, if I set 50 meters with ground resolution 3 centimeters per pixel, I still get the one line. But if I increase the resolution to 1, there are created 2 lines. So these 2 lines are created to cover this area with 30% overlap images. So if I increase this higher, so I'll get more parallel lines. So I will leave for the beginning just 2 lines. So next parameter, agile tolerance. If flying in agile mode, so the route is following the terrain, and 3 meters will be the deviation from the altitude that is the main. So the main altitude for this ground resolution, see here is 50 meters. So 3 meters plus or minus to meet the to follow the terrain. So altitude mode, there is AGL and also possible AMSL. So AMSL is used if you want to fly at the constant altitude above the ground. Constant altitude above the sea level, not following the terrain. And action execution, when the camera actions are executed, so every point is necessary to keep camera executing during all the flight. And you can add camera actions. Default camera action is camera triggering by distance. So there's also necessary camera tilt action. If that would be photogrammetry flight, so then it also will be 90 degrees if I want my camera to look down. So, but there can be some different cases where you might, for example, would like to fly the corridor and take pictures of both sides of the corridor. And in such case, maybe you want the camera to look at 45 degrees. I will change it back to AGL to have 2 lines. And in this case, for example, I would like to face camera to the right side of flight direction during all the flights. So I capture this side when I fly forward and the other side when I fly backwards. We can't change the camera yaw for DJI drones. For some other drones, this function is working. But for example, for DJI drones, we need to change the drone yaw. So to have it looking aside, I specify 90 degrees to the next waypoint. So it means flying next waypoint, it will look to the right. Now I can upload the route and show in the simulator how it would be executed. When you use a DJI simulator, if you start it up, it remembers the previous location of the drone. And sometimes it happens that it do not adjust the altitude. So it's recommended if the location of simulator is changed that you repeat the upload one more time. So now the flight should be in the expected altitude. Press the auto mode. I assume there might be the use cases when you do not want to capture images for mapping, and you just need to specify the altitude. Currently, there is no option to specify only altitude. So for the drone without camera, you can specify any of the payloads, and then adjust the camera, changing this ground resolution and checking the altitude in the elevation profile. So this is how the flight is executed. So the drone all time will be facing the side, and camera is in 45 degrees. So I'll stop probably this road. Return home. This is the scenario when probably drone can fly forward and backward on one battery, and when it finishes the road back home here. But I will adjust the road, so I will have 3 lines instead of just 2. So in this case, the drone will finish the flight here at this point, and you, of course, want the drone to return home. It is possible to execute return home from a remote controller, from a mobile application, or pressing a button return home in UgCS for UgCS desktop application. And in such cases, the drone will perform return home on this specified altitude. And it will go on straight line on 50 meters back home. There might be the cases when you have some obstacles between this point and your home location. You can use return to home, of course, specifying the altitude that is above these obstacles. Then you need to observe the area where you are flying and specify the altitude higher. Or another option, you have to create additional waypoints after your current route. So I'm adding here the waypoints to get the drone back to my home location. So I'm showing this because we received some questions regarding this return to home functionality. There is some smart return home that would avoid obstacles. The thing is that UgCS do not control the drone and do not upload any route for return to home. Return to home function, it is completely controlled by the autopilot, and we cannot change how the drone is performing it. So for safe return home, you have to create a route back home, or you need to increase the altitude above all the obstacles. If there were some hill, for example, here, so I would create manually the road above the hill, so drone safely crosses the hill and it flies back home. There might happen the situation that when you create the road and there is a waypoint limit, 99 waypoints for DJI drones, and this waypoint limit is reached, for example, at this location. So it means that a drone, after finishing mission, it will be still on the mission, but here it will finish it and it will stop. So using the road continuation option, you can upload the road from a specific waypoint. This is waypoint 51. I'll show it a bit different way. So waypoint 50. I'll just imitate that. I'll get the drone to the point. Oh. Okay. So when drone reaches this point, if it's in the air, so the road is colored in darker green color, and you can see where it has finished. Let's say I'm not starting, but here's when the road is ended and drone is here in the air. So while the drone is still in the air, you can upload the next portion of the mission. Okay, it will not work with the simulator. So I'll just set the waypoint 50, but in case of road continuation, sorry, my colleague just returned from the field. So you upload the remaining portion of the road where it's still in the air, and it can come home. If there's a situation that there is no signal where the drone has stopped, well, then the only option will be to go closer and return drone home manually. So that's the reason why it's important to research the area of the flight before actual flight and understand where the drone will finish the flight if it's not returning completely home. So this will be all for the probably for the manual creation. Now I will show the import of KML files and how route can be imported and what are the options. So to import from KML, I just select the KML file. In the next version, there will be additional options for corridor mapping and facade scan. I wanted to show also facade scan today, but unfortunately, it's not yet finished, and I will just stay with the corridor mapping. So you select the drone, and the road is imported. I'll hide the previous road. So to better understand what I have imported, I also will import this KML file as a two-dimensional object. So this is a single line created in Google Earth. So if you import a single line, so the route is created using parameters from the previous created mission, and you can just adjust the route according to your requirements. Camera actions are not added. I'm not sure, maybe that will be updated, but in this case, I would require to add camera action manually. So now with a single line, it's very simple. So there's one line. You can add the waypoint before the road for your takeoff location. And after the road for landing. So this case is very simple. The next one, I have created the KML with the 2 lines. Oh, 3. So again, it's the same. So the original KML looked like. So I will remove the previous one so it doesn't confuse us. So in this KML file, there are 2 lines. One is going here, and then it's a creepy line above. So the imported road, it consists of 2 corridor mapping segments. So for each line is created 1 segment, and the lines are connected together with a simple straight path between them. If this road is fine for you, so it's executable. The both lines have the same overlap settings and the same flight width, the path. You need the same count of lines, and you can just leave it as it is. But if you want each segment split, or for example, change the start point, so right now you can duplicate the road. And delete the other segment. So first I deleted first segment, and second I will do the second one. So now I have 2 separate corridor roads from a single KML. This logic, for example, for simple waypoints, right now, if there are more lines, they are connected between them. And we chose to create it like 2 segments. They are connected just to straight lines. If it's necessary, you can add waypoints between them. So I'll quickly also show how to do that. Sorry, a bit nervous. So to create additional waypoints between these two lines, you have to select the segment after which you want to insert the line. So here are two segments that I am selecting first. If there will be, for example, 4 segments, and you want to insert between third and the fourth segments, then you have to select the third segment. And select the waypoint tool and create additional waypoints. So then you can change the path between these lines. Oh, I have specified too low altitude here. So I will delete this one and return to the one log line. Oh, now better just create new mission. So it might be possible that you have you import in the KML file the line which is in very long, for example, I don't know, 10 kilometers, 50 kilometers, or even more, and you would need to create an inspection for it. Right now, if we import it as a road, we will get one very long corridor road. If we set it wider, for example, 100 meters between the lines, so right now there will be the flight path along all the line till the end. Then drone should return back home, then again, and so complete this flight 4 times. Even with battery changing, it might be actually very difficult. So the current design that we are we think how it would be more convenient for this road splitting. I'll just draw it manually. So one option would be that you would be able to split this corridor by segments. So it means you import this whole line, but then you specify distance or other parameter, and you get such segments. So you can complete the segment from one point, and when you have completed the one, you have next with the same settings on the same line. But here you can see that drone will complete this one in closer distance. So you can complete one segment and move to next, and such way complete all the road. Currently, we think about 3 options what we can offer how to split. So one would be the distance. For the segments, for example, all distances like 50 kilometers, you specify you want to split them for 5 kilometers. One, so there will be created 10 roads with each containing one segment. The other option is to specify just yeah. So one option is you set the number of segments and how many to split, then specify the distance for each segment, and the next option is specifying the waypoint number of waypoints. How many waypoints should contain this segment? Like here, there we don't have too many, but if we use terrain following, then it's might be as well that in 1 kilometer you have already 100 or even 200 or even more waypoints. So you can specify the number of waypoints, and code will be split by waypoint count. Here, if you think that you might need some other option, we would appreciate if you could send to support@ugcs.com your use case. What kind of data are you collecting? So we better understand the purpose of the flight. And maybe your wishes, how would you like to see this split option to work? If no, then there will be those 3 options. So now I would want to explain, to answer the questions that Samuel had sent in today in this support. So the first question is how can we create a corridor mapping route if there should be the different distance and number of these parallel lines. For example, if you need to inspect the river, luckily I have on the map here the river nearby. So here's the distance. It's more wider, and here the distance between the coasts is shorter. So here those might be, I don't know, 50 meters, and here already to 200 meters. So in such case, we can we'll need to create several segments of the corridor. So we can create first corridor till this location, and here, for example, it will be enough with 50 meters. I can create some intermediate waypoint. And create already the next segment. And here set the distance larger. Also, if you will import this one line, the KML, so you will have all the road the one width, but after splitting it with a splitting tool, then you can adjust necessary distance between the coasts for each of lines. So then there was a question regarding these points in the middle. Just so these are actual coordinates for the line where the line is changing direction. So You can adjust them by selecting the point or by changing the coordinates. And this actual point will be the waypoint only in the case if you have a single line. If you will have more lines, so those will be only the coordinates around which the road is created. So if there are two parallel lines, so those will be in the equal distance from each side of the point. And yes, another question was what we do if, for example, you are flying in on uneven elevation, and the road on the other side so it's finished on the altitude that you cannot perform the straight return to home location. So it's what I was showing you already. So there are two options. One is to check the elevation and set elevation above the obstacles to return home. In that case, drone, when the return to home is executed, so it will ascend to return to home altitude and then go back home. But if the road is finished on the other side and you cannot perform just return home on a straight line, so it means you need to create the road back home using the waypoint tools. And then there was a question regarding the photogrammetry tool and this parameter camera top facing forward. I'll quickly draw the road. Just a segment of photogrammetry. No, sorry. Camera top facing forward means that if a drone is flying on this direction, no, it's the other side. So it starts from this point and it flies to this direction. So camera is facing horizontally, and if you are capturing, for example, 60 to 9 images, so this will be the top 16 will be here upside. This mainly is for fixed cameras. Sometimes might be that if you have the gimbal, you adjust the gimbal so the image is facing the other direction, so you can remove it. But that's used for the calculation of the road. So how actually you have turned the camera, it will not. Yeah, first of all, it will not turn the camera, and if you change the camera direction, so the road forward overlap will not be recalculated. So then there are some questions which were submitted during the registration. I want to answer. So regarding the followed terrain, after return to home. That's what I explained. So UgCS do not control the return to home process. It is controlled by the autopilot. So we cannot affect how the drone will perform return home. We can only specify the altitude. If the drone autopilot has a smart return, the drone is following the train based on some sensors or something like that, then it's possible, but we cannot affect it. There was a question when we will implement the camera actions with adaptive bank turns. With DJI drones, it's currently not possible because that's a limitation on DJI firmware level. Camera actions are not executed with adaptive bank turns. So even if we add them to roads, they still will not be executed. Regarding the height, altitude limitations, also UgCS can create roads at any altitude. So these limitations, which are in the drone profile or road profile, this affects only the creation of the road. So if you select in the drone profile altitude 2 kilometers or 3 kilometers, you will be able to create the road. But limitation is on autopilot level. And such road with altitude above the one which is allowed in the autopilot, if it's being uploaded, it's simply not accepted by the autopilot. Now I'll check the Q&A section. So the question is, if we were to import the KML file, would it be a line or area for the path? It depends on which option of the route you choose when you import the file, and also of the files. This KML, which I am importing now, it contains the lanes. So for line string segments, it's possible to create waypoint. In the current UgCS version, in the version 3.7, there will be an option to choose a corridor mapping or facade scan. If the area is some polygon, then it's possible to create area scan, photogrammetry, or perimeter scans. Additional question, also maybe you can consider having a tool for split a large area into smaller chunks for all the auto generation tools. Yes, we had thought regarding it, but right now there are too many variables. For example, how to split photogrammetry road. Let's say this road, it can be split just along the lines. It can be split in smaller squares, and it is very hard to decide what options to offer. If you have some suggestions or what could be the options, for example, for photogrammetry road, you can send them to us. We will analyze. Right now, we are not planning to make splits for other tools, but if we receive suggestions and which answers most of the cases that we can think about, then we can consider creating such tool. There's a question, which tool does UgCS use for the height profile data? For height altitude profiles, we're using these elevation layers. The default elevation layer is SRTM4. I will zoom out to the world. So it covers the Earth till 60-degree north altitude, I guess. And for the above, there is another layer. It's impossible to import your own elevation data in UgCS using the elevation import.
It is possible.
Yes, it is possible.
Yes.
I will not show it right now because the files I have are large. It might take some time.
I think we will manage create a webinar on this map layer.
Basically, it's possible to import the files, and they will be imported to the local geo server, or it's possible to use external elevation sources. The next question, is it possible to generate even number of passes while planning the corridor mission? There is no option to specify the number of passes. So number of passes is calculated based on ground resolution, side overlap, and the width of the path. The question, why don't you use a specific takeoff and land tool? I can't actually explain this takeoff. I'm simply used to fly with quadcopters, and in such case, I do not need to use specific takeoff. I always place the first waypoint near my takeoff location and just start the route. The land tool you can use if you are 100% sure that you will want to land when the road ends. It is possible to upload the next route while the drone is still in the air. So once the route is completed, the drone stays hovering at the last waypoint. And you can upload the route and continue the flight without landing. So land tool is necessary if you definitely want the drone to land once the route is completed. Again, the question, why you use the first waypoint at home point and not the takeoff option the same. The route calculation is very complicated, and it would require me some half an hour to explain how the flight altitudes are calculated. The thing is that the drone, the autopilot from its sensors, it only knows one point where it is one ground elevation. It knows that at its takeoff point, ground elevation is 0, and the drone is not aware about the ground elevation at any other point. So if you perform takeoff at one location, but actual waypoint is at different ground elevation, there is a very complicated calculation for drone reaching this first waypoint. It's to perform safe flights, pilots must analyze the area where they are flying. I understand that there might be the cases when you're going to the location where you do not know where will be the takeoff point, how you will perform the flight. So with UgCS, if you do not know in advance, you can prefer for offline flights. There is such option to cache the map data in UgCS to work in the areas without internet connection. You bring the laptop with you, you adjust the route so you can perform the safe flight. Planning ahead, even creating most complicated algorithms, there might be this situation which we cannot predict, and it is simply not safe to start route from one location and the first waypoint is a different location. It's simply not possible to predict all the scenarios that may happen, and also relaying on the elevation data. This elevation data, it is, for example, this that we are using SRTM. This elevation data made by the satellite. There's a, it's not very accurate, and it's a ground elevation. It will not contain the trees, it will not contain the buildings and other obstacles. And using the software, it's just not possible to predict all the obstacles that might be between the takeoff location and the first waypoint. So using the first waypoint and the road and observing the area, it is critical for safe flights. Next question, are the waypoints calculated by difference to the position of the home position or by real difference to the terrain? The waypoints are calculated by the terrain elevation data. But the brains of autopilot during the flight is still relying to its takeoff point 0 altitude. So when the drone flies, it doesn't know that it is when it's 1 kilometer away from its takeoff location. Drone has no idea the altitude on which it is above the ground. It only knows that it is on, for example, 100 altitude above its takeoff point. So the waypoints, yes, they are calculated based on the elevation data, but altitude is then in the road. It's related also to this takeoff point altitude. So I see it's almost 1 hour past. Our target was to make this webinar shorter. This one was longer. I hope I have made some clarification about the corridor mapping. I really hope to receive some feedback, some suggestions for corridor road splitting, if you have some. Maybe your business case requires some additional parameters for the corridor roads. So if you can explain it, so we may consider also to adapt the corridor mapping roads. We don't need exact usage to know. So it might be that you may not disclose what actually you are doing, just to understand, is it photographies that you are capturing, or it's a flight that on some certain altitude and you are collecting some data, just to understand what kind of data digital it is collected, so we can better understand how we can adjust the road.
So you mean just to provide information so we can register some future feature requests, what should be developed for next versions?
Yeah, so we can understand the usage and maybe then if we understand this usage, then we know how many customers would request that, for how many customers it might be useful, and that would probably speed up also the changes.
Thank you very much, and let's meet in next week. You will receive again an invite, and yeah, thank you and bye-bye.